What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning back into the channel. Thanks for jumping on this video. If this is your first time to this channel, I hope that you'll consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss out on any future content. But guys, thank you all once again for all the support that you've shown me, and really look forward to what this year has to bring as far as disc golf content. So again, if you haven't already, make sure to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But for today's video, I got some inspiration when I was going through my garage the other day. If you haven't watched my What's on the Shelf video from a couple of videos ago, make sure to go and watch that video. But I was going through all of my discs the other day, and I started coming across some discs that have floated in and out of my bag over the years, some of which are still in my bag, but some I kind of have more as backups or I have as reserves for different things. But it got me to thinking, there are a lot of molds that I had in my collection that I would say a lot of people either haven't tried or they don't know about, because they kind of get overshadowed by some of the more popular molds in the DISCRAFT lineup. So the inspiration for today's video was going through my collection, but what I'd like to do today is go through what I believe to be, at least from my experience, the top 5 most underrated DISCRAFT molds. And so there's no specific order in which I'm going to rank these, but nonetheless, these are going to be some discs that I think more people need to try out from the DISCRAFT lineup. So the first mold that I want to talk about that I believe to be underrated is the DISCRAFT Crank. The Crank, I believe, came out around 2013. And I remember for me, I was just starting to get into disc golf pretty seriously. For me, I was throwing an all DISCRAFT bag at that time especially. And I remember for me, the Nuke and the Force were a little bit too much disc for me. However, I was getting the Nuke SS and discs like that to start turning over a little too much. And so when the Crank came out, I was very excited. And really, since the first time I started throwing it, I've been very impressed with this disc. It's a very straight flying disc, especially for me at that time. But even as I've progressed as a player and still have been throwing this disc, and I've been experimenting with different plastics and different weights, the Crank has been a pretty consistent flyer as being something that's gonna hold pretty straight, maybe get a little drift, but it's still gonna have enough integrity at the end of the flight to come back. And so the Crank for me, again, is a disc that I think more players need to try out. It's somewhere in between something like a Zeus and a Hades. So if you're finding that the Zeus is a little too overstable, and you're finding that the Hades, you need something a little bit more stable than that, I would highly recommend checking out a Crank. This thing is very fast, it has a good amount of glide, and again, it's just one of those discs that I think gets overlooked by how many great distance drivers that DISCRAFT has put out. So maybe this is a disc for you to try out. What this does for me is, right now I have some Zeuses that I've finally broken in to fly like the Crank, but I have actually had this as a backup for me in case I've lost one of those Zeuses. And so the Crank, again, really good disc. If you haven't tried it, make sure to go check it out. The second disc that I believe is very underrated when it comes to the DISCRAFT lineup is the Meteor. The Meteor is one that I toyed with putting on this list because I know a lot of players really enjoy it. However, in my opinion, DISCRAFT has the best mid-range lineup of any company. And obviously, I'm a big buzz thrower, but I know a lot of players like the Buzz OS, the Wasp, the Drone. The Meteor is one that I think a lot of players know about, but I'm not sure how many people actually bag the Meteor. But for me, the Meteor is a perfect complement to my buzzes because this is a disc that right out of the box, I can start hyzer flipping. So for me, I use this mostly in the woods when I want something to flip up and ride straight, or if I want it to hold that nice smooth turnover without having that fight at the very end of it. The Meteor is the glidiest mid-range I've ever thrown, so it's one that I can probably get more distance out of than pretty much any other mid-range that I've thrown. So again, Meteor, very good complement to something like the Buzz, even the Wasp, as far as being something a little more understable, but not being so understable that you can't really get it to fly. This thing will amaze you at the different flights you can get, and I think you'll be impressed with how far it'll go as well. So goes without saying, but if you haven't tried a Meteor, I definitely recommend you going and picking one up today. Number 3 on the list is the DISCRAFT Ringer. Now, I'm happy to see that this disc is actually starting to get a little more popular just because some of the top pros are starting to throw this disc. But for me, this has been a disc that I've leaned on for quite a while. If you watch some of my other videos, then you know that I like low profile putters. And I don't know if you can pick this up, but this is a very low profile putter. Now this particular one is in the Pro D plastic. It's a little bit flatter than some of the other ones. This thing has a really good feel in the hand. And what I like about the Ringer is it really is kind of that straight to stable flight that so many of our putters have, something like a Roach or a Luna. It's gonna fly a little similar. You might get a little more glide out of those putters than you might with a Ringer. But this disc, for me, as it breaks in, it just gets better and better. And this is a disc that's been in my bag really ever since I started throwing Discraft, which has been most of my career. And this is one that I think a lot more people need to try, especially if you have smaller hands or if you're like me and you just like the low profile comfort of a putter. Also, if your arm speed is not quite ready for a zone, this might be another good option to look to as far as that stable backhand type of shot. So the Discraft Ringer. Number 4 on the list is the Discraft Soul. The Soul is a fairly recent release. I think this came out a couple years ago. And as you can tell, Paige Pierce's name is on this now. So there's something to say about a disc if a 5-time world champion has their name on it. But again, a disc that I think gets overlooked a little too much. This is gonna be very similar to the Meteor that I talked about before, but it's a little bit slower and it doesn't go quite as far, at least generally, as the Meteor might for most players. However, if you're a player that, again, has smaller hands, you like the low profile feel, this is a good option for you. It's understable. It's something that you can, again, hyzer flip right out of the box, and it's gonna get you those nice smooth turnovers, those hyzer flip lines that ride straight. But what I think this disc is very useful for in my game is standstill shots, number one, because I don't have to generate a lot of power in order to get it to do its thing. What I also like this disc for is the fact that, again, it's low profile, so I actually use this a lot for my sidearm shots. So if I'm in a tricky situation and I can't get a big run up and I wanna make sure that I have something that flips up and rides straight, or if I want something on that nice smooth turnover line, the Discraft Soul has been a disc that I've started leaning on quite a bit, especially in the woods. This is one that gets me out of a lot of trouble. It's not one I'm gonna throw out in the open too often, but again, in the woods, this is gonna be a go-to disc for me. And it's been a fun disc for me to experiment with. So if you're a beginner player, I highly recommend it. But even if you're at the pro level, even though this is a very understable hybrid kind of putter mid-range, it still might be a good option for you to at least try out. And last but certainly not least, to round out this list, I would say for me, the most underrated Discraft mold would be the Discraft Tracker. For me, I truly can't understand why more people who throw Discraft are not bagging this disc. Obviously, you've got fairway drivers that people enjoy in the Discraft lineup, like the Undertaker. Well, for me, this is a very similar feel to the Undertaker. It's just a little bit more overstable. For me, this fits that straight to stable fairway slot, and I've had nothing but a good experience with this disc. I think more players would enjoy it if they actually took the time to try it. Now, I know that this particular mold is out of production. You get a few releases here and there as fundraiser discs, but I found these somewhat reasonable to find online. You can get them through eBay or Facebook groups. But also, if you can just pick one up at Ledgestone or wherever they're selling them, I think that more people need to try this disc. I bag these right now. I usually have 2 or 3 in my bag at any given time. And what makes this disc so great for me is I can use this for backhand or for sidearm. And given a lot of the courses that I play, I obviously love forehand and things that are overstable like the Raptor, but I also like having something that I can put a lot of torque and energy into that's gonna hold straight when it catches that speed, as opposed to having something that dumps hard to the right for my sidearm. And so the Tracker for me is something that I can throw just like a Raptor and put the same amount of energy into it, but it's not gonna fade as hard. And so that's a very unique disc to find. And for me, the Tracker, again, has just been one of the best molds that I've found for using in the Discraft lineup. I throw this anywhere from 280 feet all the way up to probably 360, 370. So it's a very versatile disc for me. This particular one that I'm holding, this one's been in my bag for about 2 years. I use this one a lot for my backhand shots. Just as it's gotten broken in, it doesn't really hold a lot of the power that it used to, but I still use it for some flip up sidearms. But I actually got a hold of one of these older run trackers, which for me, this is my favorite type just because they tend to be a little bit flatter. Again, I don't know if you can pick that up on the profile, but very flat, very good feel in the hand. It's got a really good give to it. And again, I just can't express how good of a disc this is. Again, if you like something like the feel of an Undertaker, check out a tracker. I think you'll be very impressed with this. It feels very similar in the hand. It just has a little more stability to it. And it hasn't kicked out anything like the Vulture or the Onyx for me. There's still a slot in my bag for all of those. And this is just a step down in the speed. So I can't recommend this disc enough. If you haven't tried a tracker, make sure to go and check one out. All right, guys, well, that's gonna wrap it up. Those are my top 5 most underrated Discraft molds. I know that my list is gonna be a lot different from some of your lists, so I would love to hear from you in the comments. What are, in your opinion, the most underrated disc in the Discraft lineup? Hey, what's even the most underrated disc from other manufacturers as well? I'd love to hear from you. Guys, thanks again so much for watching this video. Again, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything coming out in the future. But guys, in the meantime, I hope everybody's doing well, and I'll catch you in the next one.